listening to what they want them to do?
Well, this constituency, Bolton West, matters because so goes Bolton West, so goes the nation. It is one of those reliable bellwethers. It went Conservative in the last election, and at the moment the polls put this race fairly neck and neck. If you look at some of the local polling, we'll come to that in a second. I will tell you, we found this. Move the camera up there, you can see Rishi's Takeaway, although it's not open at the moment. I don't know what sign that is or isn't. Well, let's take you into the florist and meet Debbie McDonnell. Hello, Debbie.
Hiya.
Right, Debbie, did you watch the debate yesterday?
I watched some of it, yes.
And what did you make of it?
Not really a lot. They make a lot of promises, they say a lot of words, and they don't sort of follow anything up.
Have you decided who you're going to vote for?
No, I've watched it and not swayed either way just yet. Possibly, I'm looking more towards Labour, I must admit.
Who did you vote for last time?
I don't really vote. Something I've never really done since my 80th birthday. I've never really bothered. My granddad had an old thing that the first one that put £5 in his hand, he would vote for them, and I've sort of followed on with that.
But you might vote for the first time in your life for Labour.
I think I will be voting this year.
And why will that be?
Just because everything's a mess at the moment. There's so many promises. Doctors, everything seems to be blamed on COVID. Following COVID, you can't get appointments with doctors. The NHS, I feel sorry for the nurses. I've seen it firsthand because my dad passed away recently with cancer, and we saw firsthand how the nurses, the hospitals full of agency staff, and everybody's flagged. Businesses, small businesses, everywhere seems affected at the moment. Schools, just everything.
So you think that the Labour Party offer that change? Because the Conservatives say that they're the future as well. So you saw the debate, you saw the two different arguments, and at the moment you're convinced that Labour's the answer?
Hopefully.
OK,
yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, that's Debbie and her florist. We're going to cross over the road now, Ben. Make sure I cross safely. This is the High Street. We were in Lee, as we were saying earlier, where a lot of people complained that High Street had lost its life. A lot of shops had shut down. Here, it's a bit more thriving. Let's cross safely. We're going to take you over to Provenance Food Hall and Cafe. And in here, we've got Paul Rogers, who runs it. Hi, Paul. Paul's been waiting patiently all afternoon to speak to us, so let's come round. You can stay where you are. I'll get in my seat. And we've got Joe. We'll talk to Joe in a second. Joe's from the Manchester Evening News. All day we've been with our BBC election mugs, because the best way to find out what people think is often over a cuppa. Paul, you've been running this for a while.
Yep.
You watched the debate last night too, didn't you?
I did.
And what did you make of it?
I felt it could have been hosted better. I felt that the time spent on answering questions wasn't long enough. Some of the questions were more relevant than others and more time should have been given. I always find it impossible to understand why you ask a question that might have 3 questions inside it, and then someone turns around and says just yes or no. And I've always believed that the politics of life can't just be defined by a yes or no. There's always another story to go with it. So I think it doesn't really show the true answers or the real discussion.
What issues or what questions last night, because the studio audience, what questions really resonated with you? What were the questions that you thought, I want to ask that too?
I think in general terms they probably covered most of the hot topics for now. And you could see that. And you could see also that the crowd, I wasn't convinced that the crowd were neutral when they were trying to look to work out where to vote. I felt it was very one-sided on there and one-sided on there, and you could see that by the split of applause, when an answer was given and everyone thought, yeah, it was a great answer. So I felt that the crowd could have been better in the sense of being neutral and trying to work out what to do, like I am at the moment. And also the questions. So the questions for me, I felt that when they talk about migration and they talk about the boats and everything else, and I just think that there was a positive answer. It might not have been necessarily the right answer that people want, and then there was no answer given, and it just tended to be a debate between them.
Question for me, Paul, which a lot of people watching will want to know, given that Bolton West is a seat that almost reflects the way the country goes, is who did you vote for last time and who are you thinking you're going to vote for this time?
Voted Conservative last time. I voted a lot of Conservative through my life. I think I have virtually been swayed once, which was in the famous 97 election. And right now, I'm just not sure. I think I was very disheartened with Conservatives in the past few years since post-pandemic. But I've always believed that whatever party was in during COVID and post-pandemic was always going to have a tough time. You know, the whole crisis that hits us after the next couple of years, I don't think we're necessarily down to our UK government and the politics and everything else. I think it was, and it still is, a recession. It's a really tough time. You know, with the tax hikes, the cost of living.
So you're still feeling it, even though the economic figures show somewhat of an improvement. You're still feeling it here.
You just, you know, I mean, 10% growth year on year with regards to wage rises. And whilst I agree with living wage and national minimum wage, and we have to move those up, but since I've owned my businesses, I have seen 10% rises year on year on. No tax breaks that can really help people. So, you know, our tax allowance sits at, was it £12,750. You know, everyone's wages go up, but the tax breaks hasn't moved, which is really where you can give people money.
So I guess it comes down to this. Are you considering that you might give your vote to Labour, or is it whether you vote for the Conservatives or no one else?
I contemplated spoiling my paper because I'm just unconvinced by everything. And it's not because, and I don't believe that that's a waste of vote, because I'm still voting and I'm still saying I'm going to turn up and say this and do this, and then perhaps I'll write a story on it.
Okay.
However, I will make a vote, but I am still just not sure.
Okay, Paul Rogers there, who runs this lovely cafe restaurant. Joe Timmon, sorry I got that wrong, from the Manchester Evening News. We've been in this area for a day or so now. We were in Lee earlier. A lot of people, the message seems to be they've had enough with politics down in London, down in Westminster, and they're undecided. So, you know, we've got Debbie over the road, we've had Paul here, we spoke to other people, some even not necessarily thinking it's a debate between the Labour and the Conservative Party, but maybe even Reform coming into the mix in some of the areas here. You cover this, Beat. What would you say are the big issues to watch in terms of which way this seat and others might go?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's hard to find any enthusiasm at all for any of the political parties you mentioned. There's a lot of sort of disillusionment, I think. Speaking to voters across Greater Manchester, the things that keep coming up is sort of NHS waiting lists, costs of living. I think people have sort of really struggled over the last few years, and that perhaps feeds into that sense of disillusionment, that they don't really trust that a vote will make a difference and that politics will fix it, which is, you know, a shame. But yeah, those are the things that are really coming across strongly here.
And what's the polling showing for most of these seats?
Well, there's been a few sort of mega polls that obviously aren't sort of, you know, done by specifically asking people in the constituency, but projecting it on the demographics, and they're showing that Labour are going to have a really good night and the Lib Dems might pick up a couple of seats. It's hard to say, though, whether that will come true, because as the polls tighten, some of those narrow majorities in the mega poll might sort of allow the Conservatives to keep the odd seat here or there. And
let me mention Reform briefly before we wrap up, because what I found over in Lee this morning were quite a few people saying, well, actually, it's not that we're contemplating whether to vote Labour or Conservative, but now Mr Farage has re-entered the leadership, that they're debating about whether they should go for reform. Is that something you're finding when you go out and about?
Yeah, I think it makes sense because Brexit was such a big issue in a lot of these seats. So in Lee, which was always, had never voted Conservative before until last time, Brexit was one of those big factors that made people switch. And I think obviously Reform is sort of taking on that those voters with them in a way that the Conservatives perhaps haven't been able to. But yeah, I think there are a few sort of hotspots in Greater Manchester where Reform are likely to pick up some votes.
Joe, thank you very much for sharing your insight. So there you have it for the moment, Ben. Lots of interesting seats, of course, as you know, in the Greater Manchester area, seats that really could define how the next Parliament looks.
For now, thanks very much. We'll talk to you a little later. Just to tell you, these are the candidates that have been selected so far that are battling out in that constituency where Regina has